Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Did you know that you actually have the option to either be a sugar burner or a fat burner? It's called having a metabolic advantage, as Dr. Ben Beekman would put it. You can actually burn your own stored body fat for fuel. On this show, we talk about ketogenesis, fasting, biohacking, all with the goal of optimal body composition for longevity and having the highest possible quality of life. I hope you enjoy these interviews and solo casts that I present to you, all with this goal in mind. Welcome back to Fast Keto, you guys. I've been so excited about this episode with Tara from @Slowdown Farmstead on Instagram. She has one of my absolute favorite accounts to follow. She has devoted her life to not only raising 3 daughters and devoting her life to that and to bringing them up and raising them, but also raising animals in a humane way. And she really believes it's our moral imperative to give animals that we eat a humane, wonderful life while they're here on this planet, and dispelling a lot of the myths out there about factory farming, about grain-fed animals, and about butchering animals, and how to do it in a responsible way without shortchanging her animals or herself by not developing relationships with these animals. She has an account that shares a lot of the truth behind farming and what it can look like when we have a regenerative approach to agriculture and to raising and slaughtering animals in a responsible way. Animals really play an integral role in the vitality of our world, and it is amazing how much misinformation there is out there about what farming can really look like when it is done in a proper way. And I learned so much from following her posts, and everything that she shares, and her content is just absolutely amazing. I know that you guys are going to enjoy this episode. I had so much fun recording it with Tara, and we're absolutely going to have her back on the podcast again for another round, because we just scratched the surface today on some topics I'd really would love to go and delve deeper into with her. But I know that you guys are going to enjoy this episode. Let us know what your takeaways were from it over on Instagram. I would love to hear from you guys and what you enjoyed from the episode. But I hope that you get a ton out of this particular episode with Tara, and be sure to go over to Slowdown Farmstead on Instagram to follow her amazing posts, which are all just like reading a page out of a beautiful novel every time she does a post. It's so thoughtful and so thoughtfully done, and I really, really appreciate the work that Tara is doing. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode with Tara from Slowdown Farmstead. All right, guys. Now, I know you're like me. You love to budget and save money, but also feed your families the most high quality, delicious tasting food that is super nutrient dense. Now, that's why I love ButcherBox. They make all of this super affordable by taking out the middleman, grocery stores, and being able to purchase directly from a collective of ranches. This way, we support buying high quality grass-fed and finished beef, free-range organic chicken that's free of antibiotics, heritage breed pork, wild-caught Alaskan sockeye salmon, all of this so affordably by being able to buy directly from the ranchers and fishermen. Now, ButcherBox is offering a very special deal for listeners of Fast Keto. If you go to butcherbox.com/fastketo, new members can receive 2 pounds of ground beef, 2 pounds of bacon for free, plus $20 off your first box just by going to butcherbox.com/fastketo. That's butcherbox.com/fastketo. Try them out. I absolutely love what they do and how affordable they make it to have grass-fed, grass-finished beef and such high-quality foods shipped directly to your door, saving time and money from having to go to the grocery store, and just being able to provide really high quality, nutrient dense food for our families. So that's butcherbox.com/fastketo. Let me know if you try them out. They provide absolutely delicious meat. I love receiving my box every month, and I know that you will too. Good morning, Tara. Thank you so much for joining us today on Fast Keto.
Good morning, Vanessa. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, for anyone who may not have seen your Instagram, your beautiful Instagram account, or your blog, could you start out just by telling us a little bit about how you started it?
Yeah, I just started it initially. We have a small diversified farm here in Ontario, Canada, and I just started it because I wanted to just show a sort of snapshot into the world of farming that was positive and that encouraged people to eat meat and animal products, and to just sort of bridge that gap that sometimes is missing in uh, an urban eater's experience, and showing that the life of animals, can be a great one, and that they can be cared for deeply, and that we can increase biodiversity and the health of the land. And part of that, and an integral part of that, is also eating those animals. So I just wanted to show that in opposition to some of the nonsense that's out there. The horrors of farming. So
Well, this is what I find fascinating, Tara. Is I was a vegetarian from age 17 until I started keto about 5 years ago, so most of my adult life. And so when I started eating animal products again, it was actually partly because my best friend grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan, and she started sharing things with me about the reality of what farming life is. But I thought that I didn't know all of this stuff because I was vegetarian. And come to find that it's not just the vegetarians who don't know anything about meat and raising cattle. It's everybody. Like, why do you think that is?
well, I think that is because of the industrialization of our food supply. Because when, after World War II, when they could start growing, that put 5,000 chickens into an indoor house, or they could start sort of cheaply and quickly rely on fossil fuels to grow these grains, to grow these animals really quick, and to get people away from that connection to the farmers, to all these grocery stores. They're People think of getting food, and it's just ubiquitous that you go to the grocery store to get your food. So this
Mm.
real division, this separation from eater and producer cropped up, and these big middlemen got involved in it, as you know very well, like the processing of food, which I don't even consider those things foods, like corn and soy. I think, those are commodities. And so
Yeah.
that all went to the big corporations so they could process these dirty foods for us really cheaply. And so I think in order for all that to happen, we had to lower the standards on what it was to raise our food, whether it was like
Mm.
produce or animal products. And in order to do that, things had to sort of move into the shadows, so that they could get away with some of this stuff. So I sure understand that drive. I understand that vegetarian and vegan mentality, to move away from eating these animals, because you do see these horrors, and it's disgusting and deplorable. It's unacceptable, but it's not. It's that in order to address that, we have to create things that are different and better. And I really believe that we can protest things, but I think that to get real action, we have to create something different and better. And I think that's the way to address these issues, not to avoid it completely. Nobody cares. I mean, as we see right now, no problem, go plant-based. The food processors have figured that one out too. They're still making money. You're doing nothing. It's not affecting change. And we affect change by completely removing ourselves from a broken food system and moving to one. I think we have to create one by looking back at what used to be, and that's how we're going to change things, the way I see
Said
it.
you said something so powerful on one of your posts, and you said something along the lines of, we've traded our ancient wisdom and our ancient traditions around food and life and farming and everything for modern convenience. And basically, that's been a really poor trade for us.
Yeah.
Um, it was a really, poignant post, and just just a great point all around. And now it seems like we're trying to reclaim some of that ancient wisdom.
Yeah, it's I really think that a lot of what's happening right now just comes from a complete misunderstanding and a disconnect from the natural world.
Mm,
And I think that this is really, the sentiment of I care about animals, so I don't eat animals is really and I I don't want to say immature, but it's just a real short-sighted way of understanding what our place is on this planet, and our inherent and integral connection to the natural world. Nobody, we talk about like all this climate stuff and everything else, but you can't operate on sentiment or emotion. You have to operate within the laws of nature. And we haven't as a people. And we are now where we are. But we can do that. By doing that, these are the things that will really bring healing and understanding. And I think it's a lot deeper than that too, Vanessa. I just think, this whole, where my husband's an emergency room physician, and every night, more and more, it's happening more and more. He's getting young people that come into the emergency room with mental health issues.
yeah.
And people are sad, like we're
Yeah.
sad. And I think that sadness is sort of a hole inside of us, and that hole nobody seems to be able to put their finger on. They point to social
Mhm.
media, or they point to all these different things. I think it's just that we've lost our traditions and our sense of place, like
Right.
where do we even belong? And we belong in this ancient, since the dawn of time. We've belonged in that cycle of nature, and that cycle includes life and it includes death.
Mhm.
And that means it's a thing to respect and honor. But I think more and more people are just separate from that. But our bones sort of still call out for that place. And
Mm.
I think that we have to return to that, in whatever way, however that looks for each of us. But by saying that death is the ultimate horror, like this idea that, ultimately, regardless of how an animal is cared for in life, it has to die for us to eat it. Yes, it does. And that's okay. But we're so afraid of death in our culture. And so that's really what I want to also show. I don't show pictures of us harvesting our animals because I think it's a lot of people are comfortable saying it. I show things because I want to show humane animal harvesting in a way that makes people think that maybe, our separation and from death, both as people, we don't do wakes in a living room anymore with Uncle Henry's body sitting there. We it's hidden from us, and it's
Mm.
it's scary to people. And I think that we need to understand that it is a natural part of life is death, really, and that we can do that right, and that it's nothing abhorrent, and it's nothing vicious and violent. And so anyway, these are just sort of I think the bigger things that are leading us down this road of like all the other stuff that we see and everyone shakes their head at, like these fake meats and these processed foods and
Mhm.
all the other stuff, the health things that come out of that, both mentally and physically. So
Yeah, and you brought up so many great points there. I mean, as a former vegetarian, I was vegan for part of that, and it really affected my mental health on many levels that I can only fully appreciate now. I live a keto carnivore lifestyle that I have reclaimed so much of my mental health and stability and mood from eating this way. And I can see also from studying biochemistry how much our body needs those foods in order to make our hormones, our basic hormones and neurotransmitters. And I know that I was not personally doing a vegetarian or vegan lifestyle to the with enough education to be able to really provide and supplement for that. I don't know if it's fully possible to do that, but I can just see how much it affected my mental state and how much it has improved since, eating this way and incorporating meat back into my diet and everything. So I also think it's really interesting because we live in Czech, in Prague, and in Europe, people are less, I find, disconnected from the food supply and from animals. So in Czech, there's this thing called zabiečka, which on the weekend, they will harvest a pig, and the entire community will go to one person's home and they slaughter the pig. And then it's an entire day where together they all make sausages and they all celebrate and eat different parts of the animal, but they also together communally, you know, do a lot of the practices that I see sort of on your, blog and posts. And it's still very much a part of the tradition there. So people kind of are a little bit less disconnected from some of that ancient wisdom, and they didn't kind of go off the cliff. Like, they still eat fats and they still, incorporate a lot of those healthy things that we kind of went just on the other extreme of here, where all is you go to the store and you see this perfectly curated, pretty piece of meat, and you have no connection at all to that and the animal. And then you have this extreme where you're posting things and images of where that comes from, where that pretty piece of meat comes from, and it's being blocked as sensitive content. I mean, that just is it's such an indicator of how far removed we are from that. So I'd love to know, I mean, I know there's a lot of them, but what are some of the top myths that are out there right now about, how farming is done and can be done, and what do you see out there that really you would like, if you could put on a billboard, or you would like people to know about farming, um, that you think people should know?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good question. You'll have to cut me off on that one because I'll just go forever. um, well, I think um, I think the first thing, honestly, that comes to my mind is just this idea of fruit and vegetables being this almighty, this idea, this whole, color your plate or whatever, that, all these servings of fruits and vegetables. And boy, I would just love for people to know how those things are grown when they get them from a grocery store. And like, out of anything that's in that grocery store, just people will talk about sort of the meat being the most toxic. Actually, I my contention is that those commercially produced fruits and vegetables are just absolute garbage, and I don't care if they're organic or not, because the soils that they use for those, and I mean, I don't eat grains. I know you don't. Probably a lot of your listeners don't either. But just any sort of thing that's monocropped, and that includes commercial fruits and vegetables. It's not just the grains or the legumes or anything else. The soils are so depleted, and there are so many. I challenge anyone to read the regulations around commercially organic, certified organic food. Now they're so lax because they were sort of co-opted by big food producers so that they could still get away with, terrible marginal growing regulations that they're kind of meaningless. So that, this idea that, you sometimes I'll go, I'll have friends or something that'll say when they go out to eat, they never get meat. They will always order a salad. And I just think there's probably little that's less toxic than that salad that has no nutrients in it to begin with, that's sprayed with who knows what. The only reason those commercial fruits and vegetables are grown is because they travel far. They're all, out of the hundreds of thousands of varieties of things that could be grown, they picked, one or two of everything, just because it will last long in transit. So, and then it travels, so it's just so, whatever was in that soil to begin with, which is pretty marginal. That is what that fruit or vegetable or grain or whatever is grown from. That's what it's made of. That's the nutrients that it has, and then it's cut and it immediately starts losing those nutrients. So anyways, it's just this idea that there's some sort of angelic halo effect around these types of foods, and it's just simply not true. We have ancient old apple trees that the people that lived in our old farmhouse hundreds of years ago planted, and I can walk along and take an apple from each of those trees, and they're all I think they're sweet, but people would, they pucker up their mouths because they do not taste like candy, and they all have different flavors, and they all have different nutrients that they have in them. I mean, it's just a very different thing, but our food system has monocropped our plates, and there's if you're not getting your stuff from a small farmer in a local area, that you can ask the questions of how they fertilize the soil, what they are fertilizing that soil with, and it has to be animals. The animals are the heart of a farm. It's what everything cycles around there. But they are the fertility of the land. It's how our world was formed here. Vanessa, as you know, like the Canadian prairies were formed by um, hundreds of thousands of bison that roamed back and forth and fertilized the soil and ate those prairie grasses, and that with topsoil that was dozens of feet uh, thick is was all ripped up, not all of it, but a great majority of it ripped up so that they could plant wheat across the prairies, and our topsoil just started blowing away from there, and this has happened all over everywhere. So these animals, these ruminants, are an integral part of a farm. They can work within nature. They can work on land that is not farmable for monocrops at all. um, Here we have just over 100 acres, and we employ silvopasturing, which is the farming of the forest, surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of acres of just wild land. We have bears and coyotes and wolves and deers, and lately there's been moose sightings. And so we have, in order for me to grow a monocrop here, I would literally have to rip everything out and bring in fill and close up the wetlands that we have that our beavers manage beautifully. We'd have to get rid of all the life on our farm. It would have to be just an empty, flat piece of land that we could then, bring in some sort of seed that would grow here. And then we would have to till it, and we would have to add pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and all these different things in order to grow a food that is nutritionally depleted of really much of anything, full of anti-nutrients we couldn't digest properly. Or we can leave everything as it is. So we have these woods and our cattle move through them. We move them daily with electric fencing. They eat the leaves, they eat the wild herbs. I honestly think I'm pretty good with naming plants. I couldn't name half of what they're eating out there. I just follow them along sometimes. And at different times of the year, they'll eat different things. Different animals, like if a cow's just given birth, she'll focus on different herbs that are naturally available in the woods than the other animals will. They eat shrubs. I mean, it's astonishing the variety in their diet, and they move. They're climbing up things. We have huge limestone outcroppings here, and they're just athletes. I mean, they're using their muscle. They're under the sun, and they're within their herds. They keep their babies with them. It's just a really beautiful natural way to support them living a fully realized life. And yes, when at the end of that life, they die. They die humane death with a bullet in the head, and that's always sad, but that's just my emotion around it. And I am a firm believer that emotion should not dictate what is right and what is wrong. It's my responsibility that they've given me so much that we give them a humane death, and so that's what we have to do regardless of how I feel about it. And that is possible. Just what I want to say is that is possible, that type of farming, that we need more small farms in communities supported by the people in those communities so that we can continue on growing, and we can continue on creating an alternative food system to this commodity based system that's meant for profiteers and leads to poor health.
I love coffee. I also love having mental sharpness, concentration, and clarity, and it's one of the main reasons that I do keto. So I've been really intrigued by some of these mushroom coffees out there and these adaptogens and wanting to try them out. So I first came across this company called Sigmatic. They make these mushroom coffees you've probably heard of, and they sent me some samples to try out, and I was really interested in the one with lion's mane and chaga because I came across some really cool studies. I'll put them in the show notes for you guys, showing the positive effects on concentration from lion's mane. It is so cool. So I've been trying them out for myself, and I'm going to be sharing and posting about some of my results over on Instagram and Facebook and sharing some of the results that I experienced. But there's a couple of really cool things I also like about them. They have about half the caffeine of a standard cup of coffee, so only about 50 milligrams of caffeine versus about 95 to 100. And the half-life of caffeine is quite long, so if you're wanting to reduce your caffeine consumption for better sleep, it's a great alternative for that. And another cool thing is if you travel a lot, you can take them, these little packs that have these adaptogens in them, with you on the road when you're traveling, and that makes it super convenient. So they are offering 15% off to any of my ketogenic girls and boys out there who want to try it out for themselves. You can go to foursigmatic.com/ketogenic girl. That's foursigmatic.com/ketogenic girl, or use the discount code ketogenic girl at checkout and try them out. Let me know if you had an improvement in your concentration and focus, and if you like trying out adaptogens. I'd love to hear what you guys think of them. So head over to foursigmatic.com/ketogenic girl and try them out today. You said a lot of important things there, and it is so interesting how fruit and vegetables do have this halo effect that all plant foods do, and that somehow my mom used to always say people feel so virtuous when they eat fruit salad for dessert. And it's true. If you just take any plate and you add something green to it, suddenly makes it feel like 1,000 times or 1,000% healthier. And it really is amazing when you think about how nutritionally devoid a lot of those salads and things that a lot of people tend to eat and order, they're not really that nutrient dense. And like you said, they are sometimes quite toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And it is amazing to me as well that so much that we see, in the news about how bad eating meat is for the environment. And then, we have people eating avocados and fresh mangoes in the dead of winter in January in New York City, and having that all of that food sort of travel and shipped from South America or from all around the world. I mean, that, as opposed to eating locally, there's so many myths out there and so much bad information, and it's amazing how it's being propagated all the time. One sort of bright spark in all of that, I guess, was that some of the news this week. I wanted to ask what your thoughts were on that, seeing that it was also picked up by the Canadian media as well, and CBC, but it was in the New York Times, and research showing that eating red meat is actually maybe not going to kill us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wasn't that exciting? Like
Yeah.
I just it's so crazy that we're at a time where you get that message and everyone's like, wow, we're so excited to finally hear something like that. But yeah, that was
I mean, I just have to say real quick, I know a lot of it comes from demonizing fat. And, that was one of the biggest nutritional mistakes that we made here, is especially in North America. I find it's less in Europe, but because there's a Mediterranean diet and there's like French cuisine, they still eat a lot of fat. But here, everyone was so terrified of eating fat that they stopped eating anything that had fat attached to it, which is all the eggs, the protein, the egg yolks, anything with, red meat, because they were so terrified of it. But then also we had all this poorly done research that came out that said that if you eat red meat, you're going to get cancer. It's just a lot against eating meat and a lot sort of in favor of the plant-based model.
Mhm. Yeah, that misinformation, and it's still like it sticks,
Hmm.
it's been so drilled into people that I almost wonder if it's just gonna have to fade away with that generation that sort of got indoctrinated into that thought because it's funny because like even here where I live in a rural area, everyone eats meat. There's a lot of hunting here. I don't actually have a neighbor that I don't know that doesn't hunt. So everybody hunts. Where my daughter goes to high school, they get the week off school to go hunting. It's like it's really a big thing, and still, all serve red meat or talking about red meat, and everyone feels really sheepish about it. They'll say, "Oh, yeah, I can't give up red meat." And it's like you should give red meat up. Are you crazy? It's all a lie. But and people get so excited when you give them permission. When you
Hmm.
say no, it's not true. But yeah, I find especially in that generation maybe is sort of my mom's age, they were, I think, grew up eating it and then were told that margarine was the way and skim milk was the way, and it's just gosh, we'll never know the destruction that causes. There's no liability for giving that kind of information out to people. It's quite sad actually.
Yeah, I mean, I know my health personally suffered so much from, almost 20 years of not eating any animal products, and really I'm still making up for the protein loss, which is, I think you see a lot of people in the carnivore and keto carnivore space who were former vegetarians and vegan, and they cannot believe, especially I do nose to tail carnivore, so I eat a lot of organ meats, and the way that I feel now and function is so different. And the more you see the difference and you can feel it, and you want to learn more and educate yourself on it. And then at the same time, there's this crazy push towards veganism, and people don't realize how much money and special interest is behind it, and how many vested interests are in pushing this, you know, soylent green agenda.
Mm,
I love some of the posts that you've done on this. There was that nutritionist who was talking about how they'll help the Amazon, by eating less beef.
mhm,
Um, and there's just so much poor information out there. But the other thing too is I find when I was vegetarian, I wanted to believe all of that stuff because it was so hard to live that way that I constantly needed this reinforcement. And I
mhm,
was like looking for it all the time to reinforce my beliefs, and you would look for this stuff about factory farming. You look for this stuff because it's it really takes a toll, I think, on your health and everything. And so you're constantly looking for affirmation that what you're doing is right and it's healthy and it's the best thing, and there is a lot of bad information out there. But then when I see someone who is not vegetarian, like someone, say, for example, my parents hear information, they're like, oh, we should try these plant-based burgers and things. And I'm like, no, like they're not
mhm,
even vegetarian. And yet, the marketing and everything of this stuff is, especially someone going on CBC or on major broadcasting channels and sharing this stuff. So um, let's talk more about some of those myths about, and for
mhm.
example, what is regenerative agriculture, for people to understand that a little bit more?
Well, I think simply it's leaving things better than we got them. And in order to do that, we have to really sort of work under the tenets of nature's doctrine, not so much what I want. So I don't, approach my farm as like, this is what I want and this is how it's going to happen. I have to be observant of things and observant of my land and its strengths and its weaknesses, and try and raise animals in a way that leaves this place better. So, our property was settled a few hundred years ago, but when colonialists came to Canada, and I think a lot of the U.S. is the same way, they would just come, they'd get a free piece of land, and they'd just farm it dry. They would just they'd move on. That's how it was done. They All the trees were sort of cut from Mother England and shipped overseas, and they were not proper stewards of the land by any stretch, unlike the indigenous people that were here and had an intimate connection to this land. But and then from there, sort of families moved in and they farmed. And I have aerial pictures from the early 1900s of this property, and it looks nothing like it looks right now. But so we and after those people left, this land was fallow for a long time. They took hay off the fields, which really is just another way of monocropping things. You can't just take off hay year after year after year, and not have animals on there contributing to that fertility. So when we got this farm, it was pretty depleted. It's still one of those things that we work on all the time, and that's through like having pasture raised animals. So we have like ducks and geese, and they're all outside. We raise all heritage breeds of animals because they do a lot better. They have great immune systems, they're stronger, they have more vitality to be outside. I mean, Vanessa, the extremes of temperature where we live, it's minus 30 something in the
Right.
winter and plus 30 something in the summer, and so muggy. And so these animals have unlike sort of the more commonly seen, we all see dairy animals and we think of the Holstein black and white animal. I could never raise a Holstein here because we just do grass fed dairy. I don't give my cattle any grain, and they'd never work here. They wouldn't. And so that's part of it too, is making sure that we're keeping these genetics of these animals that are quickly fading. A lot of them are critically endangered now because, for example, certain breeds of pigs, people just went to the commercial model of pigs, that famous pink pig we all see that lives in a pig barn. And our pigs are heritage breeds pigs that still have those instincts to root for things, and they move through the pasture, and a large part of their diet is rooting for tubers and all these other things that are in the soil, and they don't get sick. I mean, we don't want animals that have poor immune systems. We want animals that can do well in all of these extremes. And so that's part of it too, is sort of replicating on our land what wild animals would do. When we have deer that come into that live all around us, but when they come through the field, everyone can watch a deer. They don't sit in a little 20 by 20 fenced in square and eat things down to the soil. That's not how ruminants work. They go onto a piece of land, they put a little bit of pressure on it, they fertilize it, and they move on. And so we try to emulate that or replicate that with like our electric fencing and moving them through things, so that they're putting that pressure on nature. They're going in, their hooves are like digging into the soil, they're pulling things up, they're eating things, they're pushing through things, and then they're gone. And then that vitality is what regenerates all of those plants and the soil. And it's just trying to work within what's there. So our wetlands, we don't trap our beaver and then fill in wetlands because that's an extra piece of land. They're actually, as an example of working with nature, those, this year we had a really bad drought this summer, and the wetland, we have a huge wetland that's, I said earlier, was managed by beavers, but the grasses, the canary reed grass that grows up in there saved us this year, because our pastures were just getting fried from the lack of rain. And those grasses that grow in that damp, low-lying area, the water all dried up in there, but we had fantastic quality, really high mineralized grasses that we were able to move our cattle into. So it's sort of like just being respectful and observant and trying to do things in a way that uses the strengths of how nature designed the system, and trying to tread lightly on the things that we do have to manage that maybe aren't so, natural, and take those things, try and limit those things as much as possible.
I love how your model is kind of not imposing what you want on the
Mm.
land, but working with it. Now, your lifestyle for me, I love looking at your blog because I'm living vicariously through you. You're living my fantasy life of like we've Pete and I have talked about getting a farm and just you're just the name Slowdown Farmstead evokes so much of what I would love to do, just go to a farm. But I know there has been actually some trends out there of young people going back into farming
Mhm.
and instead of leaving the farms. And how did you go back and relearn all of this ancient wisdom and traditions? And how do people do that if they want to incorporate more of those ancient traditions and wisdom into their lifestyles? Like, how do they learn?
That's a really good question. Hmm, how do I answer that question? Well,
Like, I mean, how did you learn all of this stuff?
yeah. Well, honestly, I think a lot of times I get like messages of people saying, "Can you just give me a book recommendation?" And I'm like, "No, there's no one book." That's like I wish, but so for me, like I grew up on the corner of our grandparents' farm in Manitoba, and I just feel I didn't learn anything. I didn't, I was around the animals and I lived out in the country, but I think that always stuck with me. So that was always a driver. I was always going to get to a place where I was on a farm. And so, um, honestly, I think it's my biggest strength is that I'm very curious person. Like I could talk to a pipe welder and just be as fascinated with him as I am talking to someone, about like, I don't know, fitting a muffler on a car. Like I don't, everything is very fascinating to me, and I think that you have to be really curious, like, you have to, because, being on a farm, you have to really be like a Jill of all trades, like, you have to be adaptable, it challenges you to the core because for me, I thought failure meant I wasn't good at something, and so you should abandon it, and you just fail multiple times a day, like, it's just failure after failure, challenge after challenge, so much heartbreak and so much physical hard work, that it can be pretty daunting, like when everyone else is getting together and going on a trip, we didn't go on trips. Like, you have to sacrifice a lot of freedoms because you're even my day, if I have my daughter at hockey at 5 in the morning, freezing in a rink, I'm coming home and still doing chores and it's minus 35 outside. So it's like everything revolves around those things. So that's the part that is not as romantic and but it's so beyond rewarding to just feel like you're tightly bound to a place and that you're part of something so much bigger than yourself. And so for me, when my kids were really small, I volunteered on farms. I found the type of farms I wanted. I had to go through quite a few farms actually because there was places that I would volunteer on and they would just be organic vegetable farms, and I'm glad I saw all the stuff that I didn't want because it helped formulate what I did want because I didn't really know. Like I didn't really know what things I thought. So I did that. I mean, I used to, when my kids were napping, I'd read farming books on like grass-fed beef cattle. Like that made no sense at all because the furthest thing away from me was a grass-fed beef cow. But I just did. I read things. I volunteered places. I ended up um, we had always bought our meat from farms, so I knew farmers, and so I um, actually had an amazing mentor that he butchered all of his own animals, and I would go spend a few months there. Uh, a couple times a year or once a year, whatever I could squirrel away for time, and we would like harvest animals and then do the butchering right there in his meat shop. So that was amazing, and I really think there's so much to be learned from other farmers. Like if people could
Yeah.
find those farmers and volunteer some time, even if it's just like a couple hours a week or whatever, just to sort of
Mhm.
get that that understanding. And there's things to learn, I think, from people and from having those experiences with people that are so much bigger and better than anything anyone could tell you or write in a book or anything like that. So that would be like my main thing. And honestly, in the end, it just comes down to doing it. We
Yeah.
can, so many people dream about things, but until you just bite the bullet and just do it, like do it knowing you don't know anything. Like do it being humble and then learn as you go. I mean, for me, that's my husband and I have lived a few different lifetimes in our lifetimes, and we always just, when we make up our mind, we just do it. And I think that's really the strength that we have to develop, even when you're totally afraid of doing it. Just do it anyway. Yeah.
Hey guys, just taking a really quick break to talk about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. If you're interested in doing a ketogenic diet for yourself, it's a great place to start. I teach you everything about how to follow a keto diet to get yourself into nutritional ketosis, and it includes 28 days of meal plans. It comes with weekly shopping lists, how to interpret results, how to test yourself, a complete guide to getting started on keto. If you've been keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to in terms of your health or fat loss, or you are brand new to keto, the 20-day challenge is a great option because it also comes with my free coaching and support in our members Facebook group, and you can post any questions that you have about the meal plans, about keto, and I am there supporting you. We have an amazing community in our group. I like to call it the happiest place on earth because everybody in there is so excited about following keto, about having found something that really works well for them. And everyone in there is just so kind, caring, generous, and supportive. And it's a really fun place to be and hang out. So if you'd like more info on it, you can find it at ketogenicgirl.com, and it's the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge.
I feel like I was so fortunate because my best friend in Vancouver, she had, grown up on this farm. And so I got to ask her questions when I had started considering bringing meat back into my diet. And I just asked her things, what was it like to eat animals that you grew up with, or that, that you saw grow? Were you okay with that? Because for myself, and I know for a lot of people who are vegetarian and who have kind of been brainwashed into believing that all meat eating is factory farming,
Mhm.
that you feel evil. You feel like a bad person. I still have days where I'm like, I question, I'm like, am I evil for eating animals? Am I bad for eating animals? And there is this psychology around it that is really difficult once you go really far in that kind of that vegan vegetarian world, where you feel like you're, better than everyone else who eats meat. And you get in this really weird psychology where you have to unlearn that and learn about farming. And I really encourage anyone to always go and speak to farmers, but to go and volunteer or work at one is such a brilliant idea, because you would learn so much about it so rapidly, and it would probably just make the understanding of it, just resonate so much more. And I really love that idea. Now, why is it that, can you talk a little bit about grass fed beef versus grain fed beef? I mean, my understanding is that grass fed is important because it is the cow's natural diet as opposed to corn or grain, and also because of the profile of the fats will be more towards omega-3 fatty acids and not so much omega-6. And maybe you could talk a little bit about grass-fed beef and what your opinion is on that.
Mhm.
And
Well,
grass-fed and finished, I should say.
yeah, it's gas finished. Yeah. So for me, it comes back to like what you're asking about earlier with regenerative farming, because
Mhm.
Here, our farm can feed our animals completely. So if I give them grain, I've lost that now, right? So I am now relying on someone else to grow those feeds for them. And I'm now bringing inputs into a system that's so beautifully designed to not need them. Like,
Right.
these animals are exquisitely designed to not have to eat grain. And I understand, grain being used started. I mean, this is a recent thing too. We have to remember that, this whole grain business that came up when fossil fuels were cheap after the war, and they found out they could grow these animals big and fast. And those animals, in the feedlots and stuff that are the beef animals I'm talking about specifically that are being fed grain, these are like continental breeds, like limousines and like these big, big, muscular looking animals that they can feed and finish within 18 months. So they move through different farms. They start off on grass and they do the whole cycle, and then they end up finishing in the feedlot on the grain. So those animals also would not work in my system at all. Just sort of touching on what I talked about before. So I want animals that are, vibrantly healthy and that can work within what I was speaking to earlier, which is the laws of nature as best as we can get close to them while still farming a domesticated animal. So I kind of tell people sometimes that I wish I could bring them into a butcher shop with me, or bring them in when we're harvesting an animal. I just think that is such a missing piece of of what people, especially people that want to be ethical meat eaters, are missing. We hide that part of it. And I I when people can see and touch and smell something on their own, it answers so many questions. And I'll just give you the example that my mentor that I used to work with, I was telling you about earlier, that when we butchered animals and then hung them, for 3 weeks in the cooler, and then, sorry, I should say, we harvested them and then hung them for 3 weeks in the cooler, and then we would go and butcher them up. And so sometimes, as a service to his neighbors, he would also, if his neighbors got in a pickle, or they wanted to just harvest one of their animals for themselves, because a lot of his neighbors were raising cattle to be finished at feedlots eventually. That's where they all end up selling these animals to the feedlot to finish off in grain. But his neighbor had a bull that hurt himself and had to be harvested, and he didn't want to waste the meat. So we went there and shot this bull and brought it back. And the bull was one of these really big continental breeds that was destined for a feedlot. So he had been really fattened on grain. He had been given quite a bit of grain. And so his carcass ended up hanging in the cooler with all these other beautiful grass-fed and finished animals. And when we went to go cut up the animal, this bull that was his neighbor's, wow, I mean, and that's where I wish that there was some sort of sensory exchange I could do, and show people like just the difference. Here's the carcass of a grass-fed and finished animal, and here's one of an animal that was fed all this grain, because the distinction is vivid. There's the smell. First of all, these cattle are prone to acidosis when they're given grain, and that cow was just acidic. The smell of that meat was sour. We had to keep wiping our hands off on our aprons because the meat was greasy. The fat is a different type of texture. It's like a greasy feeling. And so you sort of slide around on the meat more. There just wasn't this like fresh, earthy smell. The color and quality of the meat was poor. It was flabby. And I'm sure, when we would cut up meat from the grass-fed meat, we'd often just take a slice and eat it raw while we were cutting things up, because it was delicious and sweet and earthy. I mean, I can't even tell you what that other one tasted like, because my senses were like, I just wouldn't even want to taste it. So it's just this sort of like there's nothing scientific about what I'm saying, but sometimes I think the science part gets in the way. And I think that we have this inherent knowledge and instinct that gets overridden by like mixed messages. So if people have to eat grain fed meat, then I'm not going to condemn anyone for doing that. I understand where things are right now. And I think that we're in the infancy of reclaiming sort of smaller farms that are just doing pasture based things. And I think that we also have to be working towards creating these foods, a real food system that really nourishes people as well. And so, we're kind of in this quasi land right now, and
Mhm, mhm.
and I don't wanna condemn the people that have to eat this meat, or that, I just think creating divisions is not helpful at all. I just wanna put my time and energy into doing something differently and supporting the farmers and people around me that are also looking to do something differently, because we might not see the end result of a new sort of flourishing food system that feeds communities. We may not see that in our lifetime, but like I have kids, and I maybe they will, or maybe, but we still have to work in that proactive way to make things happen. And I think that grass-fed beef ultimately, and grass-fed pastured, all animals should be pastured. They deserve to
Mhm,
live outside under the sky, under the sun. I think
mhm.
things are what not only nourishes us, but nourishes the land, nourishes the animals. It's the right way to do things. And so that's really why I think we need to focus on there ultimately. But I still have sympathy for people that are outside of that system, because
Yes.
we really are in this broken food system right now.
I couldn't agree more. And, often get asked, if I can only afford grain fed or corn fed meat, am I going to be okay? Or can I still do keto? And I'm like, of course you can. I think there's 2 points, in my opinion. The first is, priorities and health, because I think that if you invest in your health now, you're going to save a lot more later. I mean, healthcare is an extreme cost burden for people as they get older to and grow in life. It is so, so expensive to be on a lot of drugs and medications and have, a lot of health problems. And it just costs you enjoyment of life. You really
Mhm.
can't put a price on that. So for me, it's priorities as well. If I can put my money towards supporting grass-fed beef and farmers, as opposed to spending it on something else like a pair of shoes, or going out, or even going out to eat at a restaurant. Like there are ways that I can prioritize things to make it more affordable, because my husband and I are very savers and budget wise.
Mhm.
But also I tell people, one thing that they can do if they're doing grain fed beef is to get the leaner cuts and then supplement with like wild caught canned sardines or wild caught, salmon, because they can get some of those healthier fats, from those omega-3 rich oily fish. And that may be some way to get a better, fat profile. But what are some ways that people can support their local farmers? I mean, is it the best way to do it through going to farmers markets? Like, what are some of the ways that you would recommend people integrate this, despite the food system being so broken? Like, what can we do, personally in our communities?
Mhm. Well, just speaking to what you were just saying too, Vanessa, is that, when my kids were small, like our oldest daughter is 27 and our other daughters are 22 and 16. So we just have one left that's at home and the other two have gone off. But when they were small and before we were on a farm, the biggest thing we did, and we were living on a really tight budget at that time. My husband was in the military. So, we were moving every 2 years at least all across Canada. And so I got really good at hooking up with farmers. And for us, food was always a priority. Always, always. Like we rented movies from the library. We, borrowed books from the library. Our entertainment was always going to parks and maybe packing a picnic and camping. Like we lived a tight financial lifestyle, but very fulfilling still. But food was always a priority. And we drove a little tiny crappy car, And the way that we were able to do that is that we set aside money every month, and we bought all our food in the fall, because that's traditionally when you would harvest animals, is especially pastured animals, when they're at their fattest, when they're at their most nutrient dense. And we would buy food in bulk. So every month we'd set aside, whatever the X amount of dollars were, because we knew in the fall we got 2 deep freezes for free off Craigslist. And we just, in the fall, we would buy like 30 or 40 chickens. I could never buy chicken cuts, like there was no way. And we would buy it directly from the farmer, and we would buy a whole bison, and we would buy, a cow and a pig, and we'd have everything butchered so that I could also get all the bones and all the offcuts, even the ears of the pigs, like everything, because I had to make, one chicken for a family of 5. I have to be able to keep that fat. I have to be able to make the bone broth. I have to be able to figure out what to do with the chicken breasts that nobody wanted. We had to hide them in other things. Like I have to stretch things, and so learning how to cook all those extra bits was really not only like a decision, that was a delicious decision, but was also like a financial and economic decision as well. So I just like I get that question so much, where people will say, "Well, you live on a farm; it's easy to eat that way." Well, but I didn't live on a farm when our kids were really small. Like they were, our oldest was 10 or something at that time. So I do understand that, and I think that as far as like sourcing these foods, like I said, so when we would move somewhere every couple of years, the first thing I would do is I would contact the local Weston A Price chapter leader. Like these people are gold, really, because um, they will have a list of all the farmers that are doing sort of traditional farming, and you can go to get with this list and go out there and meet these people for yourself. And that's what we did. I literally drove to the farms that interested me after talking to them on the phone and seeing what they were doing and talking to them about, like, fall harvest and the cost of things. And um, we would get that all sorted out right away, because I could never afford to feed my family on cuts of high quality animal, meat. There was just, there's no way we could have afforded to do that. We just wouldn't have been able to eat it. So that was one thing, was the Weston A Price chapter leaders. Also, like recently, farmers markets. We always went to farmers markets as well. But farmers markets, I think, are a good introduction to farmers, especially people that are raising meat. But you still have to kind of go armed with the right questions to ask. I've been working on a couple of things, just sort of putting down some questions for people, because as an example, in our local farmers market, there's someone that says they raise pigs without grain. Here in our environment is very unusual. And so when you ask, they say, "Oh yes, we're raising pigs without grain." But when you really drill down to the questions, what you find out is they're going around to restaurants in the city and getting all their waste for free. And as you know, Vanessa, I mean, restaurant waste is full of like vegetable oils and these highly refined
Oh
foods.
boy, yeah.
And this is what they're feeding the pigs and then selling them. So it's just like all these little questions you have to be able to know to ask, but then just really asking if you can go see their farm and see how they're doing things. And I think in a understanding way that they're probably pretty busy. And there's a way to approach a farmer and talk to them about what they're doing without sounding accusatory. I mean, most people that are farming are in it for the right reasons and are, so but I think getting out there and seeing what they're doing, and just how you, if you feel comfortable with it and what you think of it, that's also a great way. And right now too, there's a great website now called eatwild.com, and
Oh,
they have maps on there of, I know it's North America, and I'm not sure if it's beyond that. It might be, but you could literally look up, like, the state or the province you're in, and then just type in. You can look under grass-fed beef, and there's a little blurb on there of what people are doing. And if you're looking for duck, you can look up for duck. And so, and then yeah, they'll have their farm, and you can go look up their website and then just talk to them further from there. So that's an awesome resource too.
that's great. Yeah, I love that the internet is helping us connect with some of those things more. And we're lucky in Prague. We have these amazing farmers markets on the weekend that we can go to and just get, all the locally produced food. But for other people who may not have access to that, getting a deep freeze, like you said, investing in that, or finding one, on Craigslist, and, going in on, a whole animal or partial animal with other friends or family, and just storing that is so great. And then it's so convenient. You just have that available to you throughout the year, and it makes, just cooking and eating healthy so much easier.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of your most popular posts I love was about, could ice cream be a health food? And I was telling my husband about it because I was like, people are eating this like sugar-free, ice cream like I used to, from these, industrial, um, sources, and there's no real food in it. I mean, it's not even like dairy sometimes. And then, when you make ice cream from like real cream with real egg yolks and all of that, it actually, I find dairy actually and eggs taste sweet to me, because I gave up sweeteners a few years ago, and you can taste the sweetness in just cream and eggs and real food. It's amazing that you can reset your taste buds to be able to taste that. And it is a health food when you look at it that way. It can be a health food. And I just love so many of the things that you post and share about. And I think you contribute so much to this conversation of how can we fix this broken food system, and how can we restore it, for the benefit of everyone. And it excites me to see news like we saw this week, where people maybe a little bit less afraid of having red meat a few times a week, or ruminant meat, or, just not being terrified that if they have that they're going to get cancer and die, and that they have to just eat all the salads and all the cruciferous
Yeah.
vegetables, that bloat them and make them uncomfortable. And I think a lot of that particularly affects women. And I notice from being more and more carnivore and keto carnivore, I go to a lot of steakhouses, and it's all men in there. It's so funny. I am sometimes the only woman, and the whole restaurant is filled with men. And I'm like, all the men are in here eating beef, and all the women are just like eating their, large salads and eating all this volume of greens, because we're really told that that is the best way to feed our bodies and stay fit and slim and all this stuff. And really, red meat is just so nutrient dense and amazing. And I really just appreciate your contribution to everything that you're putting out there. And you really have one of my favorite accounts on Instagram. So I really encourage everyone to go and follow your post. And every single post is like reading a page out of a book. It's just so, poetic, and you take time to really put thought into what you're writing and articulating, these ideas. So I really appreciate all that you put out there. And I look forward to seeing more and more of your content. And I love seeing how much it is appreciated. You can see that people really appreciate what you put out there.
Well, I thank you so much, Vanessa. And like, I just got to give kudos to you too, because I know you've been in this space for a while, and you have, a lot of followers and people that respect what you have to say. And yet you stay like forever evolving and curious. And sometimes that can be like kind of a scary thing to do, because people want to nail people down. They want to say, well, you said this and you should always do this. And I've always respected people that are, constantly evolving and challenging what they think as well. And I really see that in you. And I just wanted to say that, I deeply respect that. And you're helping a lot of people. So thank you for everything that you put out there too.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate that. And I think, yeah, the more that I learn, and our community in this whole space, like, I don't know what you would call it, the real food space, low carb space, all of that paleo ancestral eating space, as a
Mhm.
community, we're all learning so much from each other, and it's creating so much synergy, which is really cool to see that, we're we're together all learning stuff and sharing and contributing, and it makes the whole community stronger. And it's really cool. If you could put something on a billboard out there for everyone in the world to see, what would it say?
Oh my gosh.
I know it's a question because a billboard only has so much space, but I guess, what is your main sort of vision or message that you'd like to get out there?
Um, well, it sounds kind of morose, I think, and so I'm such a woman of long-winded words, so I have nuance into everything, but it would it wouldn't be a great slogan, but it would be something about, that death is inevitable, so we have to live, and that death isn't something to be afraid of. It's not a horrible, terrible thing. It's a
Mhm.
beautiful part of life, and it's something we should all keep present and not run away from because it helps us to live more fully, and that includes, the death of the animals that we're going to eat. But I'd have to rely on you to make that into a catchy slogan. Something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, our bodies eventually will return to the earth, our own bodies ourselves, and we're part of a greater, cycle that we're probably less aware of. But yeah, I love that. I would love to have you back on again in the future to talk more. And I really appreciate your time and coming on today. And where can people follow your work? I know you're under on Instagram, Slowdown Farmstead, but you also mentioned that you have a blog that was recently started as well.
Yeah, so it's just sort of got the content from Instagram moved over there in a bit of a easier searchable format, but it's going to have more of my sort of a longer version of things that I hope to write about. But it's just over at slowdownfarmstead.com or slowdownfarmstead.ca. Either should work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, Tara. Really appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule of all that you do on the farm and sharing so much of your ancient traditions and wisdom with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Vanessa. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's episode with Gary. He is such a fantastic human being, such an incredibly heroic doctor, and just an all-around awesome person. And I had such a fun time having him on the podcast. I love all the info that he shared. So many practical, usable tips and information for people. So I hope you guys enjoyed tuning into today's episode. And if you'd like to find out more about Dr. Gary Fettke, you can follow him on Twitter under Fructose No and on Instagram under I Support Gary. And his wife Belinda is also on Instagram there under Belinda Fettke, and she is going to be coming on Fast Keto as well, because she has, as we talked about on this episode, uncovered some incredibly remarkable facts about the food guidelines that we utilize and that basically govern our whole approach to nutrition in the Western world, and what some of the actual hidden sort of secret special interests that are behind some of this, which is absolutely fascinating. So look out for that episode. If you are interested in trying out keto for yourself, or you've been doing keto for a while by yourself and not getting the results that you want to get, I would love to be your personal guide and coach. You can check out the Ketogenic Girl Challenge at ketogenicgirl.com. It is a program that comes with my meal plans. It also comes with my unlimited support and coaching in our Facebook group for members. And it is all of my best knowledge and information about keto. And it is a very effective program for getting into deep ketogenesis, into burning fat for fuel, becoming fat adapted. And I'm just there to be with you, to be your support and your guide, and answer any questions that you have when you're going through this, or just being a support for you and helping you figure out the best way to get to your goals and and to maximize your results. So check that out at ketogenicgirl.com. If you like today's episode, share it with someone that you think might benefit from hearing Dr. Gary Fettke talk so well about health and nutrition and preventative health, and leave me a rating and review. I would absolutely love to hear from you and love to hear what you enjoyed from the show. So until the next episode, I hope you have a fat-fueled rest of your day. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.